I like the analogy of a trampoline. The deeper that you go with adversity, whether that's on your farm as a farmer or with a health scare, the higher you can potentially bounce up. So I think that it's all an opportunity. Every challenge is an opportunity to change and improve health or improve the quality of what we're doing and to ask better questions.
That was Dr. Max Gulhane, and you're listening to The Regenerative Journey. From wherever we are, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, recognising their continuing connection to this land, its waterways, the stars in the skies since time immemorial. We pay our respects to the elders, knowledge holders, and to all the generations of First Nations peoples who have nurtured their unceded sovereign lands for over 80,000 years and continue to do so today.
G'day, I'm your host Charlie Arnott, an 8th generational Australian regenerative farmer. And in this podcast series, I'll be diving deep and exploring my guests' unique perspectives on the world so you can apply their experience and knowledge to cultivate your own transition to a more regenerative way of life.
Welcome to The Regenerative Journey with your host Charlie Arnott.
G'day and welcome back to The Regenerative Journey, and welcome to another episode. This one is with the doctor, Dr. Max Gulhane, again from Albury. Last week you would have heard Jake Walke and his farming exploits down there. The morning of the interview I did with Jake, I caught up with Dr. Max, where he's staying in town. I'll get to that in a minute though. Now, last week, as I was banging on about... depending on when this is going to slip into the world, I'm not sure if there's any tickets left to our farm tour. I'm recording this a couple of weeks out, so there's a chance that there's no tickets left. But if there is, get on. 13th of October, you've probably been hearing about incessantly about the thing. We've got amazing guests. $150 a ticket. You get a feed, a good feed. Breaking down a beef sort of demo, not a beast, a lamb, all sorts of cool stuff. Cherie Gooding, Stuart Andrews, Katie Zerner, Helen Lewis from Land to Market, Cole Phelan from Atlas Carbon. We've got cast 1,000, so get your tickets. There may not be any left by now, but I just thought I'd give it a quick plug. So last week I did read out a bit of a little message from Fraser at Pogue, from Victoria, who was very lovely. He sort of put out the call to see who had some interesting tales to tell about their inspiring actions from listening to the podcast. This one comes from Kim Edwards, and I don't know if I've actually got back to Kim about it, so I'm a bit naughty. I will between now and then. Hey, just sending you a message as you ask your listeners to share their stories with you. I stumbled across you a few years back listening to Alex Stewart's Low Tox Life. I resonated with a lot of what you said in that podcast, and it was early on in my venture of questioning how we are doing things and what impact it is having on both our immediate environments and the world at large. Didn't start listening to your podcast until 2021, and literally binge listens to catch up. That's awesome, Kim. Thank you. How I hang out waiting for the next episode. Here you go. You are a fantastic host. I love how casual but deep your conversations are, and the variety of guests, and from experts and pioneers in the field of regenerative agriculture to health and wellness advocates. Podcast has not only educated me, but has motivated me to take action towards sustainable and regenerative farming methods, even in our backyard in Mackay in Queensland. Awesome. I applied some of the things I learned from your podcast to help manage our 30 square metres of grass in which we have geese and chickens, as well as my tiny veg garden. That's great. We were literally overgrazing the grass. And it was really struggling and turning into a dust bowl with no grass for the geese to eat. And geez, they can eat some grass, those animals, can't they, and make some noise, but we love them. I applied rotational grazing to our tiny little yard. See, that it works, isn't it amazing? It works for cattle, sheep, geese. Not surprising. You would not believe the difference it made. It was insane. We have the luscious lawn now and don't need to block off sections of the grass. Off sections, as the grass is so healthy, I was able to handle the grazing of the geese. This is fascinating. I grew up on cattle properties at Dingo in Queensland and moved away from home to the big smoke of Rocky and then Mackay. My partner was born in Mackay, but has always loved space and the land never left my blood. So that's great. So we have finally just purchased a small block here in Mackay. It's nearly 20 acres. That is currently all under cane production, and we have big plans for restoring this land using regenerative principles. If it's been under cane, there's probably a fair bit of chemical residue there, I'd say. But but that can be dealt with. I've even completed a short uni course on agribusiness and currently underway one in agriculture. Thank you for helping inspire me to get back into agriculture and feel more empowered to engage in environmental stewardship. And she's about to tune to John O'Frew. That was a couple of weeks ago. Kim, I'm so pleased that you got back to me. Well, didn't get back to me. You got to me and you sent your story, and you have clearly made some big changes in your life and your habits, and your behaviours. That's awesome. Really love it. Anyone else who's got any more yarns? There's a few episodes left of the podcast, so if you want to flick them my way, then please feel free, DM, email, whatever else, charliearnott.com.au, contact@charliearnott.com.au is where you might want to put it. Now, Max, Dr. Max, he sports a bloody good hat, I have to say. He's always got his little sort of quite a square, flat-brimmed lid on him. He looks the part with his big mo. I'm quite envious of his mo. So caught up with Max there, again, a couple of months ago now. Had connected on the gram, and I was loving what he's doing. He's a big fan of the Nguni's, an African breed of bovine, a cow, of cattle, who are very sort of reasonably small, sort of framed animal, but are very resilient, very good at well suited to rotational grazing in many different environments, and beautiful quality meat. We just had a really, really good, honest yarn about, again, his journey, the importance of, diet and health. We talked about blue blocking light. We talked about just circadian rhythm. Lots of really cool stuff. He's down there in Albury getting some experience with a wonderful doctor down there who's very much on the same page. And he's got a big future. He's only a young buck, young rooster. But I'm looking forward to following his journey. He's hanging around with really good people, with people that other doctors and other health practitioners and other people in the industry, in food, in agriculture, and he's helping pull together some really cool community events down there, with Jake Walkie being one of them at the Walkie Farm. But look, I'm sure you're going to enjoy this one. I love the fact that he's a doctor, and I say that because that's another connection back to food, back to farming, back to health. It's all the same stuff in my books, and landscape. And here it is, Dr. Max on the regenerative journey. Well, Max, welcome to the regenerative journey, Dr. Max, and welcome to the office, library / yoga studio here in Albury, on the outer suburbs of Albury.
Thanks, Charlie. Great to meet you, and looking forward to chatting.
So am I. I've driven a few hours to get here, had a lovely sunrise, and stood out the front, not sure if I was in the right spot. Went and drained the spuds behind the tree down the road because I thought that was a lovely, I don't know if it was a yellow box or what it was, or apple box. And here we are with a full day ahead of us, not together, but I'm going to go and see Jacob this afternoon. And we'll just pretend that person's not playing their garage. But so now, Max, I know you're going to give us a bit of a rundown on your journey. Somewhat chronologically. Doesn't matter if we spear off in all sorts of different directions. We like doing that anyway. And normally I'm with a farmer or my guest in their happy place, in their garden, on a farm, in their place of work. We're in your library. Library? Can we call it that? Office?
Yeah, office.
We're looking at, I'm not going to move the camera because if I do, I tend to knock it and it stops accidentally. But we're looking at an impressive array of books that I'm assuming you've read every single one of them. You probably have you? You read most of them?
Read a couple of them. Yeah.
What is it? So with the books in front of us there, and you're in Albury, which you've been here for how long now? Not that long.
No, so I moved to Albury in February of this year.
So we're in June now. So what does it mean to you to be here in Albury, I guess, as a new chapter in your life, and maybe tell us now, because we'll get to why you're actually in Albury.
Yeah, so...
Of all places in the world you could be right now.
Yeah, well, what brought me to Albury was a career move, and I'm a general practice registrar. So I'm doing my training in general practice medicine. And I started that because for me, it was the best way to integrate my interests of holistic health.
You can lean back a bit too, mate, if you want to get a bit cozier there.
And lifestyle medicine. And the idea is that I have been through medical school. I've been through early medical training. And what I've seen in the way that medicine is practiced and the way that the majority or the default approach to treating patients has been very much emphasized one of medications. And essentially the patient comes in, they get diagnosed, and then they get a script or they get another form of intervention and then sent on their way. But none, or the emphasis is not on what has actually basically caused that person's disease or caused their illness. So for me, it started a lot earlier than that, and it started with my own kind of health journey. And I like to draw the analogy to the farmers is because everyone, before they change their behavior or they change their approach, their lifestyle, personally or professionally, is they have to go through a problem or an obstacle or a challenge themselves. So for me, I had been eating a pretty standard Australian type diet.
How long are we going back? I mean, is this all your life to a certain point?
Yeah, this was so around my early 20s, so late teens, early 20s. I basically developed quite bad acne, and acne is something that normally is affecting younger adolescents going through puberty. Quite unsightly, very inconvenient, and it was something that I was suffering from as an older adult in university. And at the time, I was doing a lot of cycling. I was pretty active, and like most of Australians, I was eating. I'd have oats for breakfast or Nutri-Grain. I would, before a ride, I'd have an Up and Go,
Special K, because it's good for you.
Special K. I mean, all these cereals. Eating a lot of fruit, and it was something that was happening. I had very bad acne. Anyway, I had my encounter with the traditional health system. Basically the clinical or the approach to treating acne in medicine is you get started on various creams. They're topical, basically creams to treat the acne, and then when that fails, because it isn't treating the underlying reason why we're developing acne, you get put on oral antibiotics, and then you get put on progressively heavier medications.
There's a really nasty one. What's the nasty one?
Yeah, isotretinoin or Roaccutane.
Roaccutane.
Yeah, that's basically the nuclear option. When people have failed the earlier treatments with doxycycline and oral antibiotics, they get treated with a very heavy duty but very effective medication. But it
has other side effects.
It's a synthetic vitamin A derivative. So what that means is that for young women, they can't take it. If they fall pregnant while they're taking it, there's a risk of birth defects. So if you're a young woman with very bad acne, you get prescribed a birth control pill at the same time. You can basically recognize people if you're very observant, walking around school or uni. They've got very, very dry chapped lips. They're always carrying a chapstick. Very photosensitive, so any sun exposure can really cause sunburn. But essentially, this medication, people are on it from anywhere from three months to a year. It will clear the acne up pretty well, but it's very, very a host of undesirable side effects. So through being a patient and going through this journey as a science student, never at any point was the GP or the dermatologist talking about, hey, maybe there are things in your lifestyle, particularly your diet, that you could change that might obviate the need for these medications. So going through that, and eventually I stopped the Roaccutane because it was it wasn't impacting my mood in the best way, and it really allowed me to sit in the patient's seat and really see, hang on, what we're doing for patients, not just acne, but a range of medical conditions, isn't in any way really getting to the core of the issue. Fast forward a couple of years, I was in medical school, and I was staying with a really good friend of mine, and very smart guy, and very very early to the piece in a range of issues. And we thought we'd do a plant-based diet. And
what was the impetus for that?
Well, the impetus was implementing what today is still the narrative, which is that if you eat a plant-based diet, you're going to be doing the right thing for your health. It's going to be the healthiest thing for you. This, as the narrative goes, it's going to be the healthiest thing for the planet. It's going to be the healthiest thing, most ethically conscious diet. So this was 2017. We ate mostly a lot of grains, a lot of pulses, a lot of whole grain bread, and this was in another attempt to see if my acne would clear up.
So this was, I was interested because so it wasn't like you were skeptical and let's give it a shot. You went, looking at options, and you went, we'll give this plant based because of the the narrative sounded like it sort of stacked up, or there was some good reason to do it.
Yeah, and the reason remains the same as today, which is from multiple angles and multiple directions, we're being told that this is the optimal human diet. So that was the reason why I gave it a go. To cut a long story short, this amount of eating this amount of plant material and very little animal food, not only did the acne get worse, but add in irritable bowel type symptoms, constantly getting colds, range of other just discomfort of feeling low, all the problems that are synonymous with not thriving. And that was another springboard. So I went through the mainstream medical system, then I went in a self-imposed plant-based diet, and at that point, you hit a rock bottom, and your skin's bad, things suck, you're in discomfort, and you're like, okay, something's got to change. And at that point for me, it was a transition to a low carbohydrate, ketogenic type diet. And that around the time, some of you listeners might be familiar with a YouTube channel called Low Carb Down Under. And a lot of lifestyle doctors have got presentations on there, and they explain how to implement low carb and how it's helping a range of people with metabolic diseases like diabetes, but also weight loss and all kinds of issues. And when I implemented this low carb, animal based and a little bit of veggies type diet, symptoms went. And it was like, okay, this is a bit of an aha moment, because having suffered for multiple years and not really been offered a solution by my treating dermatologist or by my medical school curriculum. Because you got to remember, I'm going through medical school at this point, and nothing that I was being taught had any relevance to actually improving my own symptoms. But this self learning and this private study, and then using myself as an experiment, I was kind of finding a solution, and that basically progressed when I realized, hang on, well, maybe I'll try it without any veggies. And around the time, some doctors were experimenting or promoting a carnivore or exclusively animal-based diet. Dr. Sean Baker in the US, Dr. Paul Saladino. So I tried that out. Felt amazing, and for at least 8 months was a pretty strict carnivore, and that was like an extra gear above.
So just on that one, strict carnivore being meat. Does that include eggs and dairy, or was it just meat?
It was meat, eggs, and dairy. Just no plants, plant foods, no honey, no fruit, nothing like that.
And that was for 8 months.
Yeah, about 8 months.
Did you measure all your bits and pieces, your numbers and your bloods and all that sort of stuff? Yeah. And I mean, we can talk about that. There's a range of like physiological changes that happen when you exclude carbohydrates and plants from the diet. We'll get to that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But essentially, it was a very, very interesting, I guess, self-experiment. And at the same time as working in medicine, I realized that this dietary approach was not only possible to reverse, skin problems like acne or psoriasis, eczema, but all kinds of diseases that I was seeing, as a junior doctor and in the hospital. So I basically did what a parallel education, because like I mentioned to you, none of this is being taught in medical school or on clinical rounds. And finally, I was able to, at the beginning of the year, start general practice training and see patients and offer them this as a treatment approach as their treating clinician, which is very interesting. It's been amazing to be privileged to be able to help people in this way.
Based here in Albury.
And there's a doctor called Dr. Robert Sabo, who is a lifestyle GP and one of the most experienced and proficient lifestyle GPs in Australia. So,
and he's here.
He's at the Gardens Medical Group in Albury, and he was the reason why I moved from Queensland.
The Gardens Medical Group.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So yeah, he was the reason why I moved down here, and it's been an amazing couple of months just learning off him, working, seeing my own patients, and connecting with the community. And you're interviewing Jacob Wilkie, the regenerative farmer, later. We've done events together. We're building a real partnership and synthesis of health and regenerative farming, because from my point of view, if I'm going to advocate patients eat a very low carbohydrate animal-based diet, I think the onus is on me and them to eat the highest quality food.
And if you're advocating it, then it's one thing to say you should eat this, that, and the other, but to be able to say, and you can get it down the road, or you go to this website, or you go to this shop. I mean, that's pretty important to make it, to help them execute that advice. So in terms of did you say registrar? No.
Yeah, registrar.
So you've just finished. How long ago did you finish? Or is this, I guess, the last year of your kind of medical degree? How does that sort of work?
So I graduated in 2019.
Yeah,
from Melbourne Medical School.
Yeah.
And then I worked in the hospital system for 4 years.
Does everyone have to do that?
Everyone does at least a year or two in the hospital and before doing specialty type training. And I did a bit of obstetrics and gynecology, but mostly emergency medicine.
Wow.
And general medicine, internal medicine. And that was what I was doing for about 4 years.
And then that helped you kind of get to a point of going, this is all a bit treat the symptom, not the cause sort of stuff.
Yeah, and basically when you're in the hospital, when you're seeing a patient in the hospital, they've already fallen over the waterfall.
Yeah.
So to speak. You're patching them up, you're dealing with the end consequences. It's not it's not a preventative approach. You can't intervene earlier before they kind of go off the edge. I like to think that the primary healthcare and GP type medicine, you're able to pull someone out of the stream before they go over the edge of the waterfall. So that's the beauty of general practice, when you're giving people effective lifestyle advice that can really reverse their symptoms.
Were you in that? We'll get back to your birth in a minute. I'll get to it. While we're with this part of your life, so you were in that system, ground truthing what you've learnt, which would have been an experience anyway, because I guess theory and practice are two very different things. And also, there was an expectation of you, given you were fresh out of uni, that there are questions you ask, there's a way to, your bedside manner and sort of the way a procedure to interview and then, diagnose and so on. Did you get to a point in that period, I guess more towards the end, where you were asking questions that were very different to the ones that your doctor buddies were asking? And did at any point, was that frowned upon? Were you getting colleagues going, Max, you can't ask them about their private life and their diet? Was that something you came across? Look,
it happened a couple of times, but that is why I gravitated towards emergency medicine, because I would rather be on either end, either hyper preventative, talking about lifestyle and general practice as I'm doing now, or right at that point where people are presenting really, really sick.
And you just got to get them better.
Yeah,
you just got to throw everything at them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And not be in that middle ground. And
so that was a conscious decision.
Yeah. And emergency medicine is very enjoyable for that reason, because when someone's very sick, what you're doing to them, you're less likely to harm them, because if they're already really, really sick, what you're doing to them is the risk versus benefit trade-off is better. And look, people are also more receptive to change when they're at that moment. And I had it is a great opportunity if someone's come in with chest pain, and we're sending them home for an urgent, outpatient stress test, and they've got a lot of visceral fat, they've got cardiovascular risk factors, they're smoking a lot. It's a great opportunity to talk about things, and often I would say, look, we need to do something about this, and here are some resources, here are some YouTube videos to watch. So it was a great opportunity as well to intervene and help people with their behaviour change, because they're in a very vulnerable position, and very receptive position to making changes. So I guess that and emergency medicine is a great preparation for general practice, because you're seeing someone who's showing up for the first time. But to answer the question, that was my way of I guess navigating the discrepancy between I guess the orthodox medical approach and what I saw was a lacking in addressing the fundamental lifestyle factors and determinants of disease.
So what was it, what age were you kind of when you thought you'd want to get into, well, I guess science? Did you do, before you went to uni, or was it in high school that you were thinking, oh, maybe I'll do medicine or at least science? Or kind of, at what age did you think, did you kind of feel you knew what you were going to start doing?
Yeah, it was probably not until middle or end of high school. My mum's dad was a obstetrician and gynecologist, so that was a kind of known factor in our family. And so I guess I finished school, and there's a couple of options, but I guess I wanted to try it out, because I knew it was very, very an interesting field, and it was a challenge, not easy, and I love challenges. So I graduated high school and did a Bachelor of Science up in Queensland, in the University of Queensland in Brisbane.
And you were in Brisbane at the time, like that was where
home.
your world, home.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I did 3 years of science, and then did a year of lab research, which is another interesting, I guess, quite technical facet of science. So
and science, because science generally was what interested you, or were you sort of thinking, I'll do a bit of science and then was there a bit of a plan? I was like, I'm just going to go to uni and do science because that sounds kind of comfortable. Comfortable.
It's a pathway to studying medicine, and it was kind of keeping my options open. And there was in the back of the mind, maybe I didn't want to do medicine, but science was a great way of embarking on that journey without closing other doors at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so science, was that, were you doing uni, like were you in a college? Do that sort of?
No, during undergrad I was at home. I was studying at UQ in St Lucia in Brisbane. After 4 years, so it's a 3-year undergrad and a year of postgraduate lab-based research, I applied and got into Melbourne Medical School. So that was a change of states. And I moved from Queensland.
What age were you? 20?
21, 22.
Had you been, was that like a big move? Like Melbourne is like, wow, this is like, you'd been to Melbourne before?
No. Yeah. It was time for me. It was like, this is something interesting, complete change of scenery. 4 years, studying and, being in the hometown. It was a great and exciting opportunity to move. Did
you get much work done? Were you being a uni student?
Yeah, well, I was staying in college at the time as a postgrad.
Yeah.
It's a very fun couple years, but it's a full on course, and they call it drinking from the fire hose when the amount of lectures in terms of your early medical school training. So it was very, very interesting, very, very full on.
This is back when you got to Melbourne?
Yeah, once I arrived at Melbourne.
Yeah. And how many is that? 6 years?
So it's a 4-year postgraduate degree.
Oh, okay.
I did it in 5. I did an extra year of public health where I looked at essentially training in epidemiology and public health. I guess it's a broader picture look at health and medicine. So I guess that the advantage of my journey is that, I spent a year in the lab looking at under the microscope, and then I spent a year thinking about the big picture population health. And then
right, micro and macro.
The macro, and then the clinical stuff, which is the patient bedside. So I feel like it's given me a good perspective, and I guess an ability to think about the bigger picture, because there's so many smart people in medicine, so many very, very, very intelligent people, but I don't always maybe agree that they're working on the most pressing or important problem. That's fine. I mean, everyone works on what they think is useful and valuable. But I think that big picture topics like the whole of our population's health, obesity, the rates of obesity, rising incidences of cancers and metabolic diseases. This is the 80-20. This is the big picture problem that as clinicians and medical doctors, as scientists, as epidemiologists, this is the problem that needs to be tackled. And as much as I respect my colleagues who are obviously working on the day-to-day, just seeing patients, I think that if we're going to move the needle on a larger scale, we've got to think about the problem at a more holistic way. And that, I guess, is how I've integrated, or why I'm interested in what you're doing, what Jake Walke's doing, what the regenerative farmers are doing, because that ties into what we're eating as a society collectively. And that, and we can talk about the other determinants, but the diet is a key determinant of how people are getting sick, why they're getting sick.
How do you mention about your colleagues, respectfully? How, I mean, do you want to? Do you think it's important that they have the opportunity to absorb, be exposed to alternatives? Is it too late? I guess it's an individual thing. I mean, what does it frustrate you that, I mean, you're one of many people who've gone through the system and you've had your health challenges, and there's been some catalysts for change. What hope do we have if we think that that's a good thing, that alternatives are good to know about at least? How do we get other doctors to consider those things?
Yeah, and again, I want to make the point that I'm not advocating for getting rid of a bunch of effective treatment options. I'm simply emphasizing or encouraging that colleagues focus on effective lifestyle measures, and that includes things like lower carbohydrate options, things like talking about the circadian rhythm and our light environment. So it's simply just an expansion and an emphasis on effective lifestyle kind of advice, not just eat more carbohydrates and eat less and move more, and then okay, you failed, here's your prescription. So what I think is that we alluded to it earlier in this discussion, is that people have to go through something themselves, and in my podcast where I talk to a lot of doctors, they invariably had their own health journey that forced them to flip their paradigm, forced them to ask better questions, and when you know better, you do better. So what I hope is that those doctors, a lot of doctors, will realize things through their own health journey, but if they don't, then they'd be receptive to their patients, talking to them, and discussing and being open-minded about perhaps things that work for their patients.
But as you said, it's and I know I mention every second interview pretty much Charlie Massey's called the Reed Warbler. It's tension events, it's moments of stress, it's health challenges or financial challenge or whatever the challenges are. But the low points, that's where growth happens. That's where lessons are learned. I mean, I guess it's fair to say that and this has not been critical of doctors, because we need them, and we've all no doubt had times when conventional medicine has saved lives, or saved ourselves, or prevented further disease and injury. But unless those doctors that have their own personal health challenge, there's probably not many opportunities, or many of them, that will have any other reason to change. And maybe this whole, COVID thing was a good example of that there was, a lot of pressure on them to toe the line in terms of, what the departments of health and so on were saying, and unless they'd experienced things themselves in and around the encouragement they were given, they're giving their parents, then trying to be as diplomatic as I can, then I don't know whether I need to be, but I mean that's probably another example of don't rock the boat.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Charlie. And let's be really really clear here. What we're suggesting is that, or what I believe is that the way the pharmaceutical based model of practice that emphasizes medicating, especially chronic diseases or the consequences of a disease process. What is that impetus is not necessarily coming from an impartial reading of the literature, or it's not coming from an honest desire to reverse our patients' diseases. It's a system of chronic disease management, essentially, and it's a system of chronic disease management based on or reliant on the prescribing of medication, because that is profitable for certain entities, not because it's in the best interest of the patient. And I talked to David Bushell, an agronomist, recently.
David
Bushell.
Bushell. Where's he at?
He's a regenerative farmer as well, out of Temora in southern New South Wales. But the analogy between agriculture and human health is striking, because the emphasis on of chemical inputs in the process of raising grains or doing monocropped agriculture is continued to be pushed. But the reason is because it's an economic imperative, to make money, and an economic imperative by the companies that are producing these chemical inputs, and it takes that same event, that change, that stress, to kind of ask the question, well, hang on, can things be done differently? I like the analogy of a trampoline, and the deeper that you go in a with adversity, whether that's on your farm as a farmer or with a health scare, the higher you can potentially bounce up. So I think that it's all an opportunity. Every challenge is an opportunity to change and improve health, or improve the quality of what we're doing, and to ask better questions.
Lovely. Tell me, when you're doing your work in the emergency, and I guess this question is prompted by an interview I did with Dr. Anna Rubenstein, who was in the Northern Rivers in emergency for some years. He was Melbourne as well. Maybe he might have got his ticket down at Melbourne as well. But he and you might be familiar with his work with rites of passage. He was in that environment, and he noticed that, especially young men and in some degrees young women, young girls, in their teens, were presenting having self-harm. I'm not saying self-harm in that they made choices that weren't in their best interest. They were driving too fast and being silly, and kind of, whether it was drugs or alcohol or whatever. And he sort of worked out, and he couldn't work out why. It's like they kept on turning up. Maybe not, well, some individuals, but in terms of the generation, there was just this trend. And and he kind of then started researching rites of passage, sort of things, and he sort of really worked out that, in our environment, in our culture, because it's such a mixed culture here, and it's pretty much widespread around the world, a lot of the rites of passage ceremonies and things they're not there anymore. And so there's not that, going from boy to man, or young man to man, and and so on. And so the cultural rite of passage was to drive fast and that sort of thing, and he has since then developed a number of programs for, dads and daughters, and dads and sons, and mums and daughters, and so on, which is it sort of puts somewhat of a, I guess a Caucasian spin back on things in terms of our culture and how we can emphasise the importance of of rites of passage. Did you putting on the spot? But were there particular trends that you saw in that environment similar to what maybe Anna had experienced? Was there sort of frustrations that you go, why these people keep coming in, or what was your experience in that? I imagine pretty at times stressful experiences. Was there? How did that leave you when you left that? What impression did it give you?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I think the answer that I saw was that people who were coming into the emergency department for issues that were anywhere from pneumonia to heart attacks to a range of things that seemed unrelated, they almost invariably had extra fat around the waist. They had visceral fat. They were centrally they had central adiposity. So what and that was a very, very interesting and consistent observation, is that even if someone's come in with an infection, or they had influenza, or they were having an asthma attack, more often than not, they had a pre-existing condition that medicine doesn't really make note of, which is that they simply were carrying that central adiposity. What that said to me is that the cost or the impact of metabolic diseases in society, from a health point of view, is so much greater. It's massive, and it's not being talked about as much as it needs to be. But it was striking, because it meant that, you know, if you're doing things right, if you're active, if you have low levels of visceral fat, if you're living a healthy lifestyle, the likelihood that you're going to be needing the services of the emergency department, barring car crash or other kind of traumatic event, is so low, and we're not. This link isn't being emphasized or drawn, but it's significant, and it's there. The other point that I wanted to make, because it's an interesting one that you raised about the rites of passage, maybe, and we can draw it back to this idea of community, perhaps the loss of more traditional, small, close kind of community guidance, and this idea that the community is raising a child, and maybe if one father isn't able to provide a rite of passage for his children, there'll be an uncle, there'll be a neighbour or a cousin. I've talked to Jake Wolke about this idea of reestablishing the farm as the centre of a community, and the centre of a community not only from a food point of view, food production point of view, but also from a social point of view. And the loss of the community, and maybe the loss of that local contact with other people, with the farm, with everyone in that area, is what maybe one reason why that doctor noticed people were struggling with that rite of passage. But it's definitely my hope that we can, I guess, find that, reestablish the farm, particularly the regenerative farm, at the center of a community, and by providing the really nutrient dense food to everyone, and having them actively aware of the food, the provenance of their food. That is a key step in healing the society, not only from a physical or metabolic point of view, but also from a societal point of view, in the way that you were mentioning.
Are you familiar with Zach Bush's work?
Some of Zach. Yeah.
So he talks a lot about biome and breathing. Breathing the biome. The I guess there's a physical kind of part to that, where that there's an energetic and there's a physical, but being in nature, grounding, touching, absorbing, whether it's skin or breath or eyes or whatever, that there's that connection that we're becoming a part of nature again. That connection is critical, and I totally agree that a farm is an opportunity for a touch point with nature in so many different ways. Again, whether it's the food that's eaten, the breath that's taken, the shit on the hands, the sheep shit, the cow shit, as Zach talks about, the breath of the eagle that's flown above and that finds its way into your lungs. There's epigenetic influence there that is undeniable, and so much more science around that now that, I don't think there's a better place for an individual, and especially children who aren't making choices about their whereabouts really as much as the parents, that there's no better place for them to be than on farm in that environment, picking up the good vibes, picking up the biome, and having that, those epigenetics expressed as humans were developed and evolved to do. We have that adaptability because if we're in an environment, then we adapt to it because that's the best way to survive, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so getting back to, okay, we're in a so-called civilized world where most people are not near a farm. It's not a big effort, and it is for some, and I totally get it, socioeconomically. But at the end of the day, a trip down a road to a farm is a I don't think there's any coincidence that the word, pharmacy, slightly changed, slightly different, pH to an F. I mean, that's the source of our health.
Yeah. Yeah, look, and from my point of view, the cutting edge lifestyle medicine and science is simply rediscovering or discovering the negative health consequences of removing humans from our natural environment, from nature, from the farm, from the land, from the forests, from all these environments that we evolved fundamentally exposed to and being amongst. And look, to be honest, I'd add, I agree with that, with those microbiome and the micro kind of biome influences of being in nature. But I think a key one that no one is, or very few people are talking about, is the light environment and the circadian environment. And what I mean by that is that humans, prior to the invention of the electricity grid in the late 1800s, we only had the sun and some candles and candlelight and firelight in terms of our light exposure. And why that's important is because light plays a critical role in programming our body's physiology, and it's a diurnal release of hormones that are critical to health, meaning that we need a period of sunlight which varies in its different wavelengths throughout the day, invisible and non-visible light, and then we need complete absence of light during the nighttime to facilitate healing, to facilitate recovery, to have that circadian program that runs all our bodily processes operating normally. What happened after we developed artificial light, and particularly in the past 50 years, and is that we're sending signals to our body through our eyes that are profoundly disruptive to our natural circadian rhythm. This idea of being on the farm and kind of being back in nature is that you don't have to know the intricacy. You don't have to know about the retinal ganglion cells that project to the hypothalamus and the suprachiasmatic nucleus and circadian regulation. You don't need to know about the nuances of microbiome and how that varies. You don't need to know anything about that. So the kid who is just carefree playing in on the farm, wrestling a sheep or just running around barefoot
and then eating it,
is doing everything that he needs to do or she needs to do to thrive from an optimal health point of view. They're getting that sunlight into their eyes. They're without sunscreen, without sunglasses. They're grounded. They're being programmed by the microbiome that they're being in contact with. So it's amazingly simplistic when we can scientists and cutting edge lifestyle type doctors and health practitioners, we can talk about all the papers and we can talk about all the nuances of science, but the kid who's just having fun playing in the pond on the family farm is literally doing everything right, and then going home and eating the chops that grew on the sheep that lived on that farm. He's doing everything right from a health optimization point of view. And I say that because we're disconnected. Most people are disconnected from that environment, and the health implications and the obesity and the visceral fat, and the cancer and everything is just that we're seeing in the modern society is, in my mind, a product of the accumulation of these different ways to remove us from our natural natural environment.
Yeah, it's. Do you think that there's, at the risk of going down a rabbit hole, that there's a somewhat of an orchestrated approach to that? That there's individuals or people or organisations who actually looked at all this going, you know what, if we can keep people away from farms, I think we've got a chance to screw them over and make a whole lot of money out of them. Well, because they're sick.
I think that's the key point, and is money, what you just said. And because no one is making money from someone who is, one, healthy, is eating food that they grew themselves, is not needing to use chemicals, whether that's prescription medications, whether that's sunscreens. They're not profiting from a farm that uses biodynamic principles, that is using natural fertilizers, that is refusing to use glyphosate or Roundup and other kinds of herbicides and fungicides. So that's not a profitable customer on the scale of industries that are currently profiting off people and the ecosystem's declining health. So maybe we could, you can always get go further down a rabbit hole, but I think that's the crux of the matter, is that those people aren't good customers, and the people that are good customers, which is the most of what society is at the moment, they're customers of a system that starts with industrial agriculture. It starts with high input monocrop grain production, whether that's canola, whether that's wheat, soy, in the US particularly, and it starts there, but then it continues into the processing of the food, processing of those commodities. And I interviewed a guy called Texas Slim. He calls them false commodities, because the listeners might already know that canola was essentially a cultivar of Nebraska rapeseed, but specifically bred to have a low percentage of what's called erucic acid, which is a fatty acid that's basically cardiotoxic in mammals. So they had to breed this oil seed, to have lower levels of toxic erucic acid, to then manufacture on mass scale to basically put into the food supply, and then convince scientists and people that it was more beneficial for health than natural animal fats like lard and tallow. So it starts in the fields. It starts with the promotion of high input agriculture. It goes into the highly manufacturing of food, and then when people fall ill, 1 decade, 2 decades, 3 decades later, that is also a profitable customer for a different form of corporation. But essentially, they're not selling chemical inputs to the land; they're selling chemical inputs to humans. And it's
a lovely segue, though, isn't it? From we'll grow the food that's going to make you sick, and then we'll have the so-called solution to keep you alive, not necessarily improve your quality of health, just keep you alive longer, so you're a longer living customer, client.
Yeah,
it's a great business model.
It is, and there's lots of ways of thinking about this, but I think one that's pretty intuitive is if you can imagine 3 steps, and at the bottom, you have someone that's dying. On the middle step, you have someone that's surviving, and at the top step, you have someone that's thriving. Medicine and surgeries, pharmaceutical pills, they'll get you from dying to surviving, or they'll prevent you from dying if you are surviving, and that's why they're so beneficial for people who are acutely unwell. But they're never going to get you to a thriving point of view. You can't take pills, and that won't get you to a thriving from merely surviving. You have to, lifestyle and diet will get you that second to third step progression. So again, that's not a good customer. People on the top shelf at top step are not a good customer for any of the businesses that we just talked about. And I guess it's my interest as a lifestyle doctor is to help as many people as possible to thrive and to avoid basically falling down that third step.
Yeah, people on the top step aren't contributing to the bottom line at all. tell me what you know about vegetable oil. We just touched on it there. Canola being one of the more common ones in our well, not in our diet, but in processed foods and in modern diet, and the relationship between the amount of vegetable oil in our diet and sunburn. Do you know your correlations with?
Yeah. So the history of vegetable oil goes back to the late 1800s, with a product called cottonseed oil, and cotton seeds were being used in the deep South of America. They were a byproduct of cotton production, and enterprising businessmen were looking to value add to their products, and they were refining the cotton seeds into oil. Around the late 1800s, it was being used to adulter the pork lard in the South of America
To fill it out.
Yeah, so you could save money if you watered down the wine, so to speak, with cotton seeds instead of pork lard, which is obviously more expensive to manufacture. And then in the early 1900s, the Procter and Gamble company, who is making a bunch of care products, and they're now a multinational conglomerate, they introduced a formal hydrogenated cottonseed oil product that they marketed as vegetable shortening, called Crisco.
Oh, yeah.
And they targeted housewives and said, look, this is more hygienic. This is made in a shiny lab. This is better for you than this.
What was it, mate? It was
dirty pork
vegetable oil.
Yeah, it's hydrogenated cottonseed oil.
That's exactly. Is it still cotton? Is it still?
So Crisco is
Crisco
is cottonseed oil. Well, it was vegetable shortening. It was a solid product.
The solid one, right.
Essentially, that was in the early 1900s, and then over time, when they introduced more different types of seed oils, and soy was a big one in the US, but in Australia it's basically been canola and sunflower. They're the main ones. But essentially these oils are they're hyper concentrations of a barely edible product. So they're a seed that has to be extracted and refined in a process that involves high pressure extraction, deodorization, degumming to get this oil that is then bottled and sold as an alternative or an ideal health product. It's replaced animal fat. That was been this transition over the past, particularly 50 years, and it's the impetus to replace it was in many ways partnering with science. And there was a bloke called Ansel Keys who had a hypothesis that eating dietary fat is going to cause heart disease in people.
Was that an hypothesis, or that was a convenient business opportunity?
Well, that's again, it's the American Heart Association in the 1960s basically publicized this proclamation that you should replace animal fat with seed oil in the form of soy oil, corn oil, or canola oil. What not a lot of people know is that they took funding, the American Heart Association, from Procter and Gamble.
Sorry.
In the company that first released the Crisco and the cottonseed oil product. So I like to say that the decision to emphasize the seed oils in the diet never came from health,
wasn't
interest
science
in health. No, there was influence. There was economic imperative there from all kinds of players, including the producers of cotton, of the end product, but also of the growers. So there was, and again, it was an experiment. It was, and they admitted it was an experiment because no one had eaten that amount of omega-6 fatty acids, polyunsaturated fatty acids in the diet before. It wasn't
ever on the face of the planet.
No, because you couldn't access 100 years of corn and then process it enough to get oil out of it, and then cook your food in that amount of hyper concentration of these oils. Seasonally, certain tribes would eat a large amount of nuts which contained these type of polyunsaturated fats, like the Kalahari Bushman. But previously, the only most readily available source of fat were animals, and it's saturated fat. It contains very low levels of linoleic acid, which is one of the chief fatty acids in these seed oils. So people weren't getting the amount of of linoleic acid that they are getting now with this highly processed, highly refined diet. And again, talking to the agronomist David Bushell, canola is one of the most fragile crops. It needs so many different rounds of spraying with glyphosate, with with atrazine, because it's simply it's not a robust crop. It's been babied along, but it's I think it's a great it epitomizes the industrial food system.
There's so many reasons why growing canola is a bad idea, environmentally, and all the way from a farm situation, because it needs bare paddock. We used to grow a fair bit of canola, and you would annihilate the paddock with glyphosate and a few other additives to sort of residuals. You'd then spray it before or after with Treflan, which was a residual that stopped any narrow leaf like cereals and that coming through. Then you'd have your canola germinate, and then there'd be a series of sprays to keep the cereals out, and then you would have, and I only heard this the other day, slaters. So slaters, those little crustaceans that you see under wood piles, they can wipe it out. You can be wiped out with the cabbage moth. There's a root disease, I can't think the name of it. There's so many different pests and diseases, so to speak, that need to be mitigated against during that life cycle of the canola. And
nature doesn't want you to grow a monocrop field of canola.
It's yelling at that crop, and the farmer's saying, you shouldn't be doing this, and it's literally throwing everything at it, And the only one I'm being critical about right now is myself, who didn't know better, because it was like, it's X worth a ton. We knew the recipe. I didn't appreciate the chemical load that was having on all the indirect and direct impact that was having, and it is a good example, isn't it, of pushing against nature, pushing shit uphill to get to a point where you're not actually there's no offset. There's no like, well, we're going to just bloody bugger nature up a bit, but the end result is really good for humanity or mankind or whatever, or our health. It's actually like we're creating, and costs a bloody lot of money too. Big risks, A lot of input to get a product that is somewhat, well, I won't say killing people. I guess it is killing people in some ways indirectly. Back to the sunburn.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, ingesting an amount of polyunsaturated omega-6 fats in the way that normal Australian diet or American diet would prescribe basically alters our ability to tolerate sun exposure. And we mentioned earlier in the interview about isotretinoin or Roaccutane, which is, again, to treat acne, or doxycycline, which is an antibiotic. Both of those increase your photosensitivity. But both of those medications will make you more likely to sunburn. So it's well known in medical literature that certain medications increase photosensitivity. Well, having a high omega-6 diet rich in these seed oils also increases photosensitivity and will make you more likely to burn. And the probably is because these polyunsaturated fats are being, they're being taken up and being made part of your skin cells, and they're highly volatile. They're highly prone, likely to be oxidized from a chemical point of view. That's what makes them so harmful to human health. So your skin is simply therefore again more likely to burn because it contains these more oxidizable fats in it. And it's something I noticed when I cut them out of my diet. Almost invariably, people notice it when they cut seed oils out, and we call it. I interviewed a guy called Seed Oil Disrespecter. He's from the States, and his point, which I really resonate with, is that you've got to basically have zero tolerance with added sources of linoleic acid in the form of canola, sunflower, corn, soy oil, margarine, Nuttelex, because anything more than if you're including any more than what you would get from just natural whole food, you're getting too much, and you are going to increase your risk of getting sunburn. So sun resistance to sunburn is definitely something that we see when that omega-3 to 6 ratio improves when people cut these oils out.
Because I mean the proliferation of sunscreens, and which are many are dubious in nature themselves. Like it's adding fuel to the fire, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, and look, let me talk about that because I mentioned sunglasses and sunscreen, and again, it ties into this idea of we're supposed to be regulated by natural wavelengths of sunlight. What happens when you block sunlight, either through an applicable cream that is preferentially blocking UVB rays, or when you're wearing sunglasses that are preventing UV from entering your retina, is that you're sending a confused message to your body. And in the case of sunglasses, and when the sun hits your eye, you make a chemical chemical signal to darken the skin. So the receipt of sunlight through the eye, and particularly early in the morning, will precondition the sun for the ultraviolet light that comes later in the day. When you're wearing sunglasses, you're not letting your body have a congruent message, so that it's unable to anticipate and therefore darken the skin. So if you're eating seed oils and you're wearing sunglasses, particularly in the morning, then you're giving yourself a recipe for getting sunburn.
And putting cheap, crappy house paint sunscreen on, which has got a whole lot of God knows what in it.
Yeah, and look, let's talk about that. I mean, Hawaii banned sunscreen because it had, I can't remember the compound, oxybenzones. They're basically a bunch of highly toxic endocrine disrupting chemicals. It was killing the reef. So they banned people from wearing sunscreens because it was actually impacting.
Not because it was killing people.
No, because exactly. But what that message is that when again you're confusing your physiology, you're sending a very distorted circadian signal to the body when you're blocking certain wavelengths by applying the sunscreen. So the answer is not to wear sunglasses and to wear sunscreen. It's to simply regulate your sun exposure based on your Fitzpatrick skin, your fairness and your latitude and the time of the year. And the process of getting early morning sun in your eyes and on your skin, which is predominantly red and infrared and non-visible.
What hours like in a normal day? What what time?
So UV, it depends exactly where you are.
Yeah.
But usually before 9 a.m.
Okay.
You're mainly getting red and especially at the sunrise. But UV shows up later in the morning, and by the midday you're going to get your highest UVB index. So the act of getting that early morning sun prepares your body for the UV later in the day, because we would have evolved without clothes to be exposed to that sunlight throughout the whole day.
That's fascinating, isn't it? With the eyes and that exposure goes, okay, skin.
Well, and that's the point. I mean, this is another whole rabbit hole, but the eyes, it's like a neuroendocrine organ. And what that means is it receives different wavelengths of light and it translates that into hormonal signals that program our sex hormones, program our thyroid hormones, program our metabolism. It's all linked to cues from the sun. And I did a podcast series with Dr. Jack Cruz, and he really emphasizes these points.
Jack Cruz?
Yeah, Dr. Jack Cruz. And he's illustrating the degree, or emphasizing the degree to which human biology relies on correct light signals. And I guess that is, maybe my invitation to other doctors or practitioners in the lifestyle space is to, yes, diet's important, but it's not the only facet of optimal health. And I like to say to people, we've got to look after your food diet, we've got to look after your light diet.
Light diet, yeah.
We've got to get rid of the artificial food, and we've got to get rid of or mitigate the artificial light.
Well, that's another thing too, isn't it? The light source. We are, living in a so-called modern age, and we are, we rely on lights, more or less. I was just talking to Angelica, my wife, the other day. We did a little interview for the first session of this season, and we were in the office at home at Hanamino on our farm. And I know years ago when we built that office, we put in a particular fluoro light, which was, it's like argon or something. There's a particular brand or type that is not your it's not the one that generally gets put everywhere. It's a particular one that's supposed to not zap you. I just can't think of the name of it now, but it is, the science around that is it's not as draining as your normal ones. But that's something, I guess we can't escape the fact that unless we just want to have, a fire in our house and use candles, that, lights are a convenience that we're used to, but it's as you say, it's the management of it.
Yeah.
And then you wear your little nighttime glasses.
Yeah. So Charlie, it's about mitigation. It's about mitigation of the light environment. And there's lots of things that we can do, but essentially cultivating or creating a low light environment after dark is helping to give a congruent, appropriate circadian signal to the body. Because when the sun goes down, our body's expecting an environment that's absent of light. And that's part of the process of releasing a key hormone called melatonin. And melatonin is involved in not only initiating sleep, but in terms of repairing the body throughout the sleep cycle. So if we have sleeping in a room that we're exposed to light, particularly blue light, which is what is being emitted from devices, from LEDs, you're directly inhibiting your body's ability to make your melatonin. So you're preventing your body from recovering properly. So mitigating is wearing blue light blocking glasses that have a tint on them that block blue wavelengths. It's about getting a low light environment, using candles or red close to the ground rather than overhead. These are all measures that we can do to improve our health. And this is a great opportunity to talk about what I think is important, is that the farmer has all the tools in its toolbox to live optimally. And what I mean by that is they're in an environment, they're on the land, they can see the sun from rise to set. They can eat a really high quality diet which is rich in high quality animal food from their own produce. But many farmers that I've talked to, especially conventional farmers, they still go into town and they're buying meat that's come out of the abattoir that they don't know the provenance of. They're still, eating out of the cupboard. They're eating a lot of grains. So it's sad to see, farmers who are metabolically unwell or carrying extra visceral fat or suffering medical problems, because for me, they're so close. They're literally in the right spot that they need to be, but yet they're still so far away. It's not like they're living in a cubicle in the middle of Melbourne. They're so close, but again, they're so far away. So just like I like to think that you take lifestyle advice from a doctor that is himself is healthy and is in good physical shape. Again, it's like I'd like to see more farmers be physically healthy because they are so close, and they're going to reflect from what they do. If they manifest and they exhibit optimal health and live an optimal lifestyle, that is going to ripple out and help everyone else in their community.
There's a real gap between, and I was the same when I was younger and I was farming conventionally. I was younger and I was fit. I'd go to the gym every day, a little setup at home and running and all sorts of stuff. I was a pretty fit rooster. My diet was okay. I felt like I was having fresh food, but a lot of processed crap and, beers and all the other stuff. But, and as one ages and that your diet changes a bit and exercise profile, but nonetheless, there's a gap, as has been my experience, between what I did on a farm and the stuff I did and the food that I grew or the commodity that I produced and the connection with human health. There was very little connection at all, and the responsibility, I didn't feel any responsibility to, in terms of the quality and where that food is going to go. So it is widespread, and I've been part of that system. It is, an epidemic of ignorance, and that's fine. That's what it is. This is not, being critical of anyone who's not doing anything regeneratively or whatever, still conventional farming. It's just the way it is. And, as I said many times, there's no way I would have baked a loaf of bread with the wheat that I grew, because it would have been terribly bad for me. Not that I probably even knew that then, but I'm glad I didn't, because I knew all the shit I used to grow. And it's getting worse. The glyphosate they're putting on wheat now and other cereals for desiccation, as a matter of course, is horrifying, you know. So, but there's, you know, and as you say, like the irony is they are potentially in the best situation to grow their own food. You know, they're in that environment, but you know, the less chemical they use and the more food they grow for themselves and others of quality, then it's somewhat, I feel, an exponential, you know, improvement in potential improvement in health, because, you know, the chemicals are less, the exposure is less, the air quality is better, the food they're consuming, and then it's all that biome. And if you don't do it for, as I say, you know, farmers, they might not do it for themselves, but it's their kids who can't make those decisions about, oh, dad's spraying around the house. Unless the mum is switched on enough, and I know plenty of mums who do this and have done it, they leave for a couple of days, take the kids, and they go off farm, and they just go, I know. And this is a sad but real thing, and again, it's everyone has their own sort of situations and financial and social and whatever reasons, but, you know, I know plenty that are in those situations, and they can't, there's not much I can do about it, you know, but they know innately that being around when that chemical's being sprayed is not a good thing for their kids, and they go away for a couple of days and they'll come back. It's horrifying, but again, it's part of, you know, the Australian and the world conventional farming regime, unfortunately.
Well, the addiction to processed food.
Well, it is an addiction.
Society is mirrored by conventional agriculture's addiction to chemical herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers. I mean, they're two sides of the same coin. And what's making us sick for what we're putting in our mouth, that process begins with a farmer who's getting their spraying rig out, who's bought, you know, hundreds of liters of glyphosate from an industrial agricultural company, and then starts spraying. That's where the process begins, and it's manifesting in the clinic with people that I see: fatty liver disease, with visceral fat, with ischemic heart disease.
What do you see around here? What are you seeing? You've been here 4 or 5 months now. Are you in your first time in a country practice with potentially a different set of patients than certainly from the emergency ones, but any sort of other, you know, situation you were experiencing in Melbourne? What are you seeing here? You're going, oh, there's a lot of people coming with cancer, or a lot of people coming in with, I don't know, things that you might get suspicious about in terms of, you know, exposure to chemical or exposure just being on farms in this rural environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't noticed anything specifically to kind of really make a mental note of. But to answer the question about contaminants and farm chemicals, it's well known that exposure to certain chemicals, especially atrazine and a range of other chemicals like that, cause what's called endocrine disrupting effects. What that means is that the hormonal system that, again, we talked about in terms of was coordinated by light signals, that is a very, very finely tuned orchestra. And when we ingest certain chemicals like atrazine or like phthalates, which occur in plastics, people heat up plastic meals, that can act like estrogen in the body. And that can cause the feminization of men. That can cause testosterone level and the ability of testosterone to work in the body to be disrupted. So it's a known thing, especially in the US, in the Midwest, where they spray heaps of chemicals and it enters the groundwater, these residual chemicals that you're ingesting these levels, probably at levels that are permissible by especially in the US by the regulators, that is having a meaningful impact on human health.
Oh, it's funny you say that. Well, not funny. It's interesting you say that, because I was listening to a little bit of Robert Kennedy Jr. today and this morning, and he was talking about atrazine in the environment and experiments with frogs. And of 100 frogs in water with atrazine, I'm not sure what sort of dosage, but that all of them were impacted in endocrine dysfunction, and all of them were their morphology and their gender morphology was changing, and 10% actually not reverted. They switched to a female of the males. They switched to fully functioning females that could produce eggs. Like that, and that's what atrazine did. That man-made chemical that's being sprayed on plenty of crops.
Yeah,
fascinating. That's fascinating. It's just horrifying.
It is, and I think the two biggest impacts of and kind of threats to fertility and reproductive health are these endocrine disrupting chemicals and the light environment. And there's studies showing that exposure to artificial blue light will bring on precocious puberty.
Do you think there's something in that? And Robert Kennedy Jr. just kind of didn't allude to it. He said it, but he wasn't making any bold statements that, processed food, chemical in our food, chemical in our water, the light environment, or the sort of the body's response to the light and food, and that stimulus, that input of light and food, is somewhat impacting general. Is that mine? Oh, what's that doing here? Ah, poo. I'll have to stitch that together in a video. That disruption is potentially the cause of a lot of what we're seeing. This gender, I don't even know the right word. Gender, has it to say confusion? I guess it is.
Dysphoria.
Dysphoria. That's the word. Thank you. Do you think there's something in that?
I think. There's so many possible inputs, but
or contributing
factors. But I would definitely think that based on the basic science knowledge that we have, and the fact that mammals are equally impacted, that these responses to chemicals or light exposures are conserved across mammals. That I don't think it's a long bow to draw that that these effects are valid and having negative impacts in humans. Definitely.
What about, so just one on that, so fertility in males, females, the light component, or the hormone disruption is going to impact humans and other animals, of course, but in this case, humans' ability to have babies,
to reproduce.
Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, anecdotally, you hear people having difficulty.
Isn't it like the fertility, male, semen counts are down, or the viability of males is reducing? I mean,
Yeah, well, what's been accepted is a normal reference range for male sperm counts. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it's been a process of moving goalposts. And what has become common is being normalized, because what is now common is not normal, but it's common.
Yeah.
So
they're lowering the bar.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the process is. And it doesn't seem like there's a big impetus to collectively address or investigate the causes of why that's happening. But I think in Australia, in the US, around the world, the fertility of humans is definitely being impacted, and for a variety of these reasons. But processed food and artificial light, those two key causes. I definitely agree with that.
Mitochondria. Tell me about them and their impact on, the impact on them of light. And I asked that question because I remember reading or seeing something about it recently. There, you go to a hotel and the little red lights on in the TV, or the little lights on for the fridge or whatever else, and you got these little, you're supposed to be, or even those bloody green ones on the roof where the fire alarms are, and we're all trying to sleep, and that red light being, or any, I guess, source of light impacting mitochondria function, because they need, they're more plant than animal, aren't they?
Well, they were originally bacteria, So in the primordial soup, there were different single cellular organisms, and billions of years ago, one engulfed another one and essentially enslaved it. And our cells contain these organelles, which are called mitochondria, and the mitochondria make energy amongst a range of other functions. They make energy for that cell, and you've got trillion cells in your body, and each of them contain, depending on what type of cell they are, up to thousands of mitochondria that are making energy for that cell. So they're originally bacteria, and what I believe and what I think is the optimal strategy for health is to look after your mitochondria, because if they are working properly and they're making energy efficiently, then you can have a healthy organism. And this is called a bioenergetic etiology, mitochondrial bioenergetic etiology of disease. Essentially, when the mitochondria stop working or they accumulate mutations, then the collective ability of the cell to operate starts reducing, and the cell starts dysfunctioning. And then when enough cells dysfunction, you in specific organs, you're going to get disease. So what I think that people, and this is a very, very granular subcellular way of thinking about health, but what we do influences the health of our mitochondria, and whether that's the diet or whether that's the light environment. They also act as a form of sensor. They're sensing the environment because they have proteins in their membrane that act as ability to sense light. So when we're exposed to sunlight, for example, when we're lying outdoors, the mitochondria make in themselves, they make melatonin, which again was that chemical that is antioxidant chemical. So if we're never exposed to sunlight, and instead we're under artificial blue lights the whole time, or we're covered up the whole time, we're not giving our little engines the ability to make that chemical that keeps them humming along nicely. Imagine if you never oiled your engine in your car. I mean, pretty quickly it'd start gumming up and having issues. So they need light, and they sense light in order to operate properly. The light also impacts health from the ability to make melatonin in your pineal gland, which is basically living kind of just behind the eyes. And at nighttime, in the absence of light, in the absence of the blue and the green wavelengths, that is also how the body makes melatonin. So this idea that if we're exposed to an artificial light environment, you're not allowing that body to recover. You're not sending the right signals for the organism to thrive. And we haven't talked about it at all this conversation, but sources of what are called non-native electromagnetic fields are also a form of non-visible light, and they come from things like Wi-Fi and other sources of radiation that we didn't evolve with, and they also impact human health in a negative way.
So they're just disrupting the hormonal disruption. I guess also the resonance of organs and all of the, cardinal frequency stuff that goes on in our bodies.
Yeah.
It's buggering it right up.
Yes,
and there's more and more. There's more layers soon to be thrown on top of it. Every year, every two. There's another thing coming out. 5G is the recent.
Exactly,
recent
and the mechanism. Because I want to be really clear here, because it's very easy to loop or lump this idea of 5G in with a whole bunch of wacko kind of health ideas and pseudoscience. But there's established biochemical pathology here, which is these frequencies cause the voltage-gated calcium channels in cells to remain open, and that basically triggers a process of inflammation. And I did a really great episode on this with Carrie Bennett in my podcast, Regenerative Health, and she explains exactly that when you're being constantly exposed to sources of non-native EMF like Wi-Fi, you're generating a consistent, unopposed inflammatory signal that puts stress on the mitochondria, and that additional stress, if it's unresolved or unabated, will cause mitochondrial dysfunction, and then again, the mitochondrial biogenetic etiology of disease, Dr. Doug Wallace, you're going to manifest disease because your mitochondria aren't working as efficiently.
So who is that? I'm just going to put these in this. Dr. Doug Wallace.
Dr. Doug Wallace.
Is that the person you interviewed?
No. Dr. Doug Wallace. He's a physician from the US who works with the Philadelphia Children's Hospital, and he's done very, very decades of work on mitochondrial diseases. But his perspectives about mitochondrial dysfunction form the underlying basis of a lot of our understanding of what are called complex diseases. So this idea that people are getting neurodegeneration, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, they're getting diabetes, they're getting all these problems, and we can't pin it down to one gene.
Yeah.
So it's the mitochondrial dysfunction that's able to explain why people are getting sick. And I mean, we talked about paraquat on my previous podcast. There's emerging evidence that paraquat is associated with Parkinson's disease as well. So, and whatever the mechanism is, there's all these converging and aggregating environmental stresses that are having meaningful impact on human health. And the way I think about it is the more that you stack on top of each other, the sooner that you're going to get sick, and the sooner that the wheels are going to fall off.
Well, it's also like the harder it is to avoid it. Some of these things, and again, farmers have somewhat of a choice of the safety or the cleanliness of their environment. But for someone living in an urban area where, you've got different frequencies, you've got neighbours with Wi-Fi, you've got councils, in some cities, councils are now putting in 5G light fixtures, even the smart boxes, smart electricity meters, councils spraying glyphosate all over the verge. I mean, it's quite challenging for people to, especially in the city areas where there's less control of their environment, for them to remain relatively healthy, which again spears us back to, well, get out of there. Where are you going to go? Go to a farm, which is easy to say and not and harder to do. But, even just getting out once every couple of weeks to a farm, is a good thing. Or even just getting outside, or just getting back to your point of mitochondria and their function. So if someone was outside, I'm simplifying things somewhat. If someone was outside for more in the day, and preferably before 9, so they're not getting all the UVs, would it be a oversimplification to say they would sleep better at night?
So they 100% would sleep better at night.
Yeah.
Because the signal to release that melatonin from your pineal gland, which will make you sleep like a baby, that signal starts with early morning sunrise. And
is there kind of a general period of time that, if you were to spend 20 minutes, is it 20 minutes? Is it an hour? I'm not getting prescriptive, but just like, is there a period of time that's optimal or preferred to sort of ensure a better night's sleep, if we can say that?
Yeah, I would say sunrise. If you can catch the sunrise, or any time in the early morning.
For a period of time.
Yeah, any is better than none.
Yeah.
And the sun exposure that you'll benefit from is the sun exposure that you'll get. The healthy sun exposure that you get. So I make it a practice of mine to wake up, try and get outside first thing, take my shoes off, and get that circadian programming from the sun, and that will set you up for a great night's sleep. And
are you cold plunging, cold dipping? What that sort of
so yeah, I mean, and look, we can talk about different ways to optimize mitochondria and health practices, but yeah, cold immersion is one such one for a variety of reasons. There's a Murray River down here, not too far from me.
Pretty fresh this time of year.
Yeah, very, very fresh.
Actually, it'll be colder come in spring, coming out of the mountains.
But yeah, look, it's
that's your challenge, Max. Yeah. You have to go down there.
Yeah,
as the snowies are melting.
Yeah. But
do you do it? Do you go dipping?
I do. Yeah. I haven't been lately because but I will definitely get back in there. I want to make the point that the UV is not harmful. Yeah. And again, we can talk about these narratives like to do with saturated fat and red meat and this idea that exposures that we would have had for the duration of our evolutionary past, suddenly in the past 50 years are killing us.
We didn't have the UV index told to us every day on the news, did we, back then?
Not at all. and again, it's like the UV is not, the midday UV is less of a problem if the skin's been preconditioned by that early morning sun exposure. Yep. So the fact is that people aren't developing their solar callus. They're not gradually exposing their skin. They're not doing it in a way that is facilitating or congruent with optimal health. They're going out in the midday. They've eaten a heap of seed oil because that's the standard Australian or American diet. They're getting roasted. I mean,
it literally are. It's almost like I think about that when I first sort of started reading about this, is going, well, it kind of makes sense because it's like oil. You cook things in oil. It has that kind of thing. It's almost like, is a heat source. The oil heats up and it starts doing shit and it changes its molecular structure anyway, and it burns or cooks, the food that's in it. It's like it feels not dissimilar. The more oil you have in your skin, and I'm simplifying, it's like that's just setting it up for a burn.
Yeah, it's a more reactive oxidizable fatty acid. And look, for the clinicians and doctors and the scientists listening, make sense of this paradox. The people with melanoma and skin cancers overwhelmingly are vitamin D deficient. So if the UV on its own was sufficient to cause skin cancer, why are people with skin cancers having low serum vitamin D when you need UVB to synthesize vitamin D from 7-dehydroxycholesterol on your skin? I mean, it doesn't make sense. So at that point, again, we need to ask better questions. And there's obviously something missing in that narrative that simply getting UV exposure is going to cause skin cancer. And again, for those listening who are interested, check out my Jack Crew series, where we go quite deep into exactly why that is fallacy, or why it doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny. And
the Jack Crew series is on YouTube?
YouTube. Yeah.
YT.
And my podcast, the Regenerative Health Podcast.
Yes, which we'll put in the show notes as well, which is awesome. Now, when we got here talking about, I guess, food and meat, we love our meat. And Goonie, we had a bit of quick chat of that before we went to air. You want to talk about your experiences with them and why that was of interest to you?
Yeah. I'm really passionate about the Nguni, and what they are is they're an African tribal cattle breed. So they're derived from quite ancient cattle bloodlines that migrated all the way down from northern Africa through the Congo down to southern Africa to South Africa and Namibia. And they are incredibly robust, incredibly hardy, and they taste amazing. So essentially, I was in Queensland and I went to a farmer's market, and I met a farmer who was selling regenerative meat, and I got talking to him, and he told me about his cows. Oh, well, we don't need to tick treat them. We're in really, really damp, humid conditions here in Queensland. We don't need to tick treat our animals. We don't spray anything on them. We don't drench them. We don't do anything to them. We just graze them regeneratively, and here they are.
Do you remember who that farmer was?
Yeah, the name is Bryant Usher. And
Bryant
is from Eastwell Farms. So Bryant was selling this regenerative meat, this beef that tasted absolutely amazing. And it wasn't around that time I'd met Jake Wolke on a visit to Albury, and we talked about this idea of animal welfare being contingent upon using an animal that's fit for purpose, that's adapted to its environment. And if you're requiring to give it all these inputs just to survive or to live, then you're actually not being an optimal steward, or you're not taking care of that animal from an animal ethics point of view. It's just like if you're breeding pugs and with a snout that's this long and they've all got sleep apnea. You're not. Are you really doing the right thing by them? You're not. So that was why the breed was so attractive. And 24 hours after I talked to Jake, he'd bought a bull from this gentleman, farmer Edwin Rouse, who's not far from here near Gundaroo. But essentially, these Nguni cattle are able to thrive on a diet that would be unpalatable to most British breeds. there's stories of these cows being 18 or 20 years old and they've had 18 calves, and not one of them has ever required pulling or being forcibly helped out of the pelvis. So they're very easy to breed. They'll eat anything. They taste amazing. That's the main criticism that you'll get from people thinking, oh, this is going to taste like an old boot. It's eating roughage. But no, that's a misconception. They taste amazing and they look beautiful. So I'm really passionate about the Ngunis and really looking to help raise the profile of this beautiful cattle breed, and hopefully getting more people, more farmers farming them. The interesting point that Edwin made when I talked to him a couple of days ago was that their use as a tool of land regeneration is maximized because they're not being sprayed or being injected with any kind of chemicals. So that the dung beetle is better able to thrive because there's no chemical in that cow's digestive tract. So the potency of the tool to regenerate the land is increased when there's no chemicals used. And he moves them every couple of days or every day. And again, it's that process that so well of regenerating the land and using the cows as a tool of land regeneration. So and that's from a farming point of view, but from a health point of view, I talking to a range of clinicians, and one of them is Dr. Sean O'Mara in the States, and he's doing MRI scans on people and identifying visceral fat, which is the fat around the waist, and identifying what's known as fat in the muscle, myosinostosis. And when you MRI someone, you can see fatty infiltration in that muscle. Why that's a problem is because that's associated with mortality or early death, because it implies that you don't have good muscle strength, and it implies that you've got this inflammatory situation going on in your body. So what the question then is, why are we eating animals that are floridly have fatty muscle? And that's what a grain-fed Wagyu is. It's got fatty infiltration within the muscle.
Almost like you see some of those photos of a cut through, and there's almost, and there probably is in some cases, more fat than muscle.
Yeah,
it's actually alarming. It goes, what's holding that animal up?
Yeah. It looks like a metabolically sick animal. That's a metabolically sick human if they had that much amount of fatty infiltration. So
but it's sought after, though, isn't it?
It is, and
well, and a lot of people go, more intramuscular fat, the better it is, the better eating it is, because the fat contains the flavour, which it does, but it's kind of, I guess there's a point there. That's extreme.
Well, I would suggest that eating fully grass-fed animals that have fat cap but less intramuscular fat is more ideal. And that is exactly what the Nguni have, and that's what would happen if you eat venison or any kind of wild caught game, is that there's a fat cap, which is subcutaneous fat, but there's very little intramuscular fat. And I'm going to be in partnership with Jake and some other farmers to get some testing data so we can back up or to really get insight into the health benefits of eating fully grass-fed beef over the commodity beef.
Talking about health, tell us about Quantum Health Summit.
Yeah, so that's a partnership with a couple of other doctors, Dr. Pran Yoganathan, who you've interviewed, and Dr. Jalal Khan, who is a Sydney dentist and quantum health practitioner. So the idea of quantum health is one that emphasizes mitochondria, and it emphasizes the circadian rhythm, and it uses physics and the principles of physics to kind of explain but also optimize health. So it'll be a one-day event on the Walkie Farm November the 5th, and there'll be a range of speakers, and we're going to be giving people insight into how they can optimize health from a quantum point of view. And I guess the tenets of the light, water, magnetism, again, these are things that Dr. Jack Cruz has talked about in depth, but it's just a slightly different way of approaching health that is it seems to be more fundamental than merely looking only at a dietary approach. So for people who are interested, it's going to be a pretty interesting event.
magnetism?
Look, that's not something that I have delved deep into. But again, it's this idea that on a subcellular level, the operation and the way mitochondria function is influenced by magnetism. And again, it's not a strong point of mine. I won't talk on it myself. But for those interested, come along to and hear Dr. Jalal explain how that's relevant to health.
There is something in the ionisation of water, and certainly running water through a magnet and the natural flow of water through a river and the wave action on a beach ionises the water and gives it a negative charge, which is the structure of water that the body can best utilise water as the many functional ingredients in one's body. So there's a fair bit in that, isn't it? The water structure and you can have structured water or non-structured water and different devices to do it, and there's natural processes. But it's a fascinating world, isn't it?
And crux of the matter is that get into a natural body of water. Go swimming in a lake, go swimming in a river, go swimming in the ocean. If you find a clear spring, drink out of it. We don't need to know the physics to benefit from that.
There's a lot of the Emoto, what's his name, the Japanese fellow who throws water and the intention and the good, the bad, and so on. Look, I'll put that in the show notes too. And there's a lady in New Zealand doing some great work there too. I can't remember her name, but she's doing some fascinating stuff with seen her on Instagram with a technique of freezing water that she's using with some clients, and like it is irrefutable the images that are produced and referring to different words and different thoughts and like photos, putting the photo of a dog underneath. Oh, it's fascinating stuff. Putting a photo of a dog, and they did it in the case of like grieving, people grieving the loss of a dog or just experimenting with it, but putting the picture of the dog under the dish, right, for 30 seconds and having a pure intention about what you're doing, taking the photo away and then putting it in the freezer and coming out, and it's not like a drawn over the top of, it's not like a one-for-one kind of thing, but it is undeniable the image of a dog that looks remarkably like the one that was in the thing. And just even the thinking and the thoughts around when you holding that dish, fascinating stuff. I just can't. I'll put her in the show notes.
Yeah, definitely interested in reading more about.
Oh no, she's fantastic work. Now, Max, conscious of the time, we've got a little Q&A to do after this, and then you're going to have a chat with me or you, or we're going to interview. That's the next little bit we're going to do. So for those who want to know the probing questions that I asked Max in this next Q&A session, you'll have to just join it to our Patreon community, charliearnott.com.au. For $10 a month, you get videos and this and that and transcriptions, and I'm hoping that we are giving the podcast members everything that they we'll actually be giving the podcast, the Patreon members a discount to the webinar series that we're launching. Actually, when this comes out, we might even be in the webinar series. So I'm not sure what point there is in saying it, but there is going to be a farm tour on the 13th of October at Hanamino. It is part of the web series, but we're probably going to open that up to the public to buy tickets to come along to a feast. The idea at this point is we're sitting here in June, so hopefully by then the same plan is going to come to fruition with a chef or to cook us some lovely grass-fed meats and produce and showcase a bit of things, plant a few trees perhaps, and do a biodynamic bit of a demo. And also some of the presenters of our webinar series are going to be on farm, on site, talking about this stuff. So I'm going to get this all right now. Cherie Gooding is going to be talking, Dr. Cherie Gooding talking about animal health. Cindy O'Meara is going to be talking about human health. Kim Dean's talking about farm finances. Nicole Masters talking about soil. Brian Warburg's going to be talking about grazing and plants. and Stuart Andrews is going to be talking about hydrology and natural sequence farming. And I'm forgetting one there. That's terrible. And start kicking it off with Katie Zerner is going to be talking about visions and goal setting. 7 weeks, and then the 8th week is going to be a bit of a panel discussion. Max, that's been a wonderful yarn, and I look forward to having a bit more of a chat in a minute, and continuing this discussions, dipping in and out of this over the next few years.
Yeah, thank you.
The rest of our lives, Max.
Fantastic, Charlie. Yeah.
And I'm going to try and get myself down there on the 5th of November, by the sounds of that. Looks great.
Great, yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. It's been a fascinating discussion. Cheers.
And next week on the Regenerative Journey, I interview Peter Challender down there. He's west of Wagga. It's the 4th and final in between Highland Beef little mini episode. We did it on the Zoom, so I didn't get to check out his 900 acres down there west of Wagga, which would have been amazing. I hear it's incredible. He's a cattle breeder amongst many other things. He was I'll keep all the bang on about Peter till the intro of his actual episode, but had a lovely chat, very interesting guy, and it was. I'll get to his farm one day. It just sounds fascinating the way his journey's taken the last few years. He's bought the farm, using regenerative practices there to improve the resilience and no doubt the quality of the cattle. He's now breeding there and involved with Highland Beef. Peter Challender on the Regenerative Journey next week.
This podcast is produced by Rhys Jones at Jaeger Media. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to subscribe, share, rate and review. For more episode information, please head over to www.charliearnott.com.au.